Well, and what we wanted to do was to really understand where advanced manufacturing stood in New England today, any issues or challenges it faced, and what the future looked like. And we're going to go through some of that in the report today. But one thing was clear, that the issues and challenges that we identified in the report, the key findings, could not be addressed by any one state, and they could not be addressed by any one stakeholder, whether that was education or the manufacturers themselves or some other organization. In order to address this, we really needed teamwork and collaboration across the states. This is a region, and we are vastly more competitive as a region than we are as 6 independent states. And I think that that can be translated to the way in which we work with Canada as well. Because I think the proximity, there's already a lot of collaboration, Pratt & Whitney, Bombardier, a number of examples where there's a lot of collaboration across the borders. I think it's important that we think region-wide in order for us to compete with the rest of this country, but also in order to compete with the world. So I think a lot of the themes that we'll show today will hopefully help you gain an understanding of New England, but also help maybe put some thoughts in your minds about how to approach global competitiveness from a broader regional point of view as well. I must thank the New England Council, Jim Bratton and Chris Averill, who can't be here today, were absolutely leading champions of this and have been tireless in their sponsorship of this report throughout. And the contributions of the working group that I mentioned, many are listed on the back of the report, and the report is available in full on the New England Council website. Before we get into the details, there are 3 key messages that I want to communicate. And if you take nothing else away from this session, hopefully you'll take these 3 things. Number 1 is that advanced manufacturing is vibrant, it's growing, and we have a competitive advantage in New England. It is a thriving industry sector here in New England. And that, I think, is based primarily on the fact that we have a rich history of manufacturing here. We have the networks and infrastructures in place already. We have innovators, incubators, education institutions. We have a lot of the advanced machining and other kinds of capabilities here that really position this region as an ecosystem. Designers as an ecosystem that can compete where other regions just don't have those kinds of resources in the kinds of density that we do, network together the way that we do. So it's a very successful sector of the economy today. However, point number 2, we really believe that it's at an inflection point. And unless we take action, that competitive advantage is going to erode. There are a number of reasons for this inflection point, but the single most compelling issue is the skills gap, which all of you, I'm sure, will be very familiar with, that there are employers looking to fill positions, but we are not turning out people that have the appropriate skills to take on those roles. And that's a fundamental problem for us, and there's some data in the report that estimates the size of that gap and the impact of that gap. In order to fill that gap and address that challenge, we think it's very important that manufacturers work very closely with education institutions and put together some creative pathways to help develop people with the kinds of skills and capabilities needed to be successful in this advanced manufacturing world. The third point is that if we're going to compete, we've got to compete as a region. As I just mentioned, for us to be successful, this is not something that we can do on a state-by-state basis. We think that it is important that we compete as a region. Many of our employers span multiple states. They source employees from multiple states. Yet many of the educational programs vary from one state to the next. The rules and regulations vary from one state to the next. It becomes very difficult and challenging for a small business to be able to navigate that. And if we can operate and coordinate and simplify as a region, we think that that can have a tremendous effect on growing and maintaining that competitive advantage around advanced manufacturing. So that's the setup. I'm going to hand over to Alison Lands, who's going to take you through some of the details of our report, and then I think we're going to have a panel discussion thereafter this as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Can I speak through this one? Okay. So as Mark mentioned, just to kind of tee up the conversation, we talked to over, I would say, 125 different policymakers, state, local, and regional, advanced manufacturers, small, medium, and large, educational institutions, including universities, technology incubators, community colleges, and technical schools as part of this report. We really tried to be as comprehensive across the 6 New England states and across the advanced manufacturing landscape as possible. And just to kind of tee up the conversation about advanced manufacturing in New England, we'll talk a little bit about what advanced manufacturing means. It means different things to different people, and there's some bit of debate about what exactly constitutes advanced manufacturing versus traditional. We'll also reiterate that the perception of manufacturing, not just in New England, but across the industry, is a dark, dirty, or declining industry. When you look at the data, there's really some challenges there that show that rather than being a dark, dirty, declining industry, manufacturing is actually evolving, and advanced manufacturing springs off of traditional manufacturing to be something that's much more advanced and accelerating and value-adding than its previous counterpart or the previous iterations of industry. And in fact, we're moving towards this concept of Industry 4.0, which is something almost entirely different from what we're even talking about today. We'll even be talking about what comes next. But overall, the big takeaway here is that for New England, for all 6 states, but for the region as a whole, advanced manufacturing is impactful to this region, and it brings jobs, investment, and competitive advantage to the 6 New England states and the region as a whole. So when we went looking for, what is advanced manufacturing, we spoke to the folks in the interviews about this. They had similar but differing opinions about what should be the definition. And in fact, I was speaking to one of my clients down in Virginia last week, and he kind of said, someone's telling me this isn't advanced manufacturing, this is not advanced. I'm telling you, it's just not. So there's almost like this gut or, subjective opinion about what is or is not, and I guess as part of the manufacturing, automation and robotics sector, you probably have some pretty strong ideas about what constitutes advanced manufacturing. But for the purposes of the report, we combined academic literature, conversations with these folks in interviews, et cetera, to come up with kind of 3 key tenets that no matter which definition, whether it's the President's Council of Economic Advisors or one of the trade or industry groups that defines manufacturing, there's kind of 3 key tenets of advanced manufacturing. And one is the element of combining innovative design with advanced materials, technology, and superior management methods. And so I think one of the previous speakers mentioned that you like to leave the drudgery to the robots, but you really want to take those complex engineering and design concepts, and you want to give those to the people to do. That was one of the hallmarks that we found of advanced manufacturing. Not only that, the industry is defined by how competitive advantage is gained, and less about what is being produced, low-cost inputs, and labor arbitrage, which were really more identified with a traditional style of manufacturing. And moreover, advanced manufacturing, which differentiates itself from traditional manufacturing, is growing. In 2014, the industry added 16,000 jobs per month, and there's evidence of reshoring that is increasing. And if anyone follows kind of Reshoring America or any of those national initiatives, they're really starting to articulate the value proposition that companies have for reshoring manufacturing jobs that were previously offshore and bringing them back to the United States. In New England, advanced manufacturing holds particular significance. Mark mentioned the traditions of manufacturing and the roots that it has here in the region. Those roots have evolved over time to give rise to professional networks and agglomeration economies and spillover innovations that have really made advanced manufacturing a stronghold here in New England, with over half of all manufacturing jobs across each of the 6 New England states being advanced manufacturing, and in many cases, a lot more than that. The median wages in this region are 70 to 80,000 US per year, which is significantly higher than the median wage nationwide, or even across other sectors. The demand for workers in this sector significantly exceeds supply, and I think that's something I'd like to put to the panel when we discuss with them kind of some of those workforce development challenges and whether those resonate across the border. But in New England, if you're talking about manufacturing, it's most likely advanced manufacturing. So even the traditional textile industries or production processes that exist from previous iterations of manufacturing industry often incorporate elements of advanced manufacturing, such as automation or robotics or innovative design or materials that do introduce advanced manufacturing into their production process. So we're all in Boston today. We're here at the Nerd Center. Massachusetts is in fact the regional hub for advanced manufacturing within a strong region of New England. It constitutes nearly 40% of the jobs here are classified as advanced manufacturing, and it's really the intellectual innovation hub of the region in terms of having access to the human capital, the innovation incubators, the university infrastructure, all kind of coalesces around the Massachusetts and greater Boston area. These charts are a little bit of an eye chart, so I apologize for the folks in the back or even in the front who may not be able to read them, but I'll give you an indication of what they talk about. We took a look at the data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, economic census data, et cetera, and over time, you'll see the line on the top, the light green line, that's advanced manufacturing. At the bottom, that is all other manufacturing, traditional manufacturing sectors. And so if you look in the upper left-hand corner of the slide, we've tracked real GDP over time, and in advanced manufacturing, while it, as well as traditional manufacturing, suffered a decline during the Great Recession. So there's this kind of shaded bar in the middle, and you'll see both lines plummet kind of dramatically. That's the 2007 to 2009 period that we recognize as the Great Recession. Coming out of that recession, traditional manufacturing continued to decline steadily at a 13% year-over-year decline of growth. But the GDP for advanced manufacturing actually turned upwards and started to grow double digits year over year, and to this, at this present time has grown 12% year over year. A similar pattern emerges with employment trends and hiring. So again, the line on the top is advanced manufacturing, and the line on the bottom is traditional manufacturing. During the Great Recession, both industries suffered, but coming out of the Great Recession, there's this marked shift where traditional manufacturing continues to decline in terms of hiring and employment to the tune of 15%, whereas advanced manufacturing starts to gain traction, grow jobs, and we have a growth here of 7%, but you'll notice a light gray line above that says 12%. That's actually the delta of job openings that could not be filled. So it's hiring that was not able to be realized in the advanced manufacturing industry because the skilled talent wasn't there to fill the open positions. And we'll talk about that a little bit more further into the presentation. So we've made the case for why advanced manufacturing is differentiated from traditional manufacturing and why the data supports that this is a growing industry that is adding jobs and creating value. But in New England, there's specifically a set of factors that make this region particularly competitive with respect to advanced manufacturing. I think folks who work in industry recognize that this region is an expensive place to do business for a variety of reasons. Energy, taxation, the cost of talent, etc. But although this region is considered a traditionally high-cost region, the emerging economics of production that are reflected in advanced manufacturing actually give New England a competitive advantage. And we'll talk a little bit about that in this section. We'll go into which particular industry clusters are New England's strong points, as well as those for Massachusetts in particular. And we'll talk a little bit about an overlay of capabilities in software, artificial intelligence, sensors and automation, and advanced materials, which actually lay on top of those industry sectors and provide further advantage. And lastly, we'll look ahead a little bit to disruptive technologies and what the next kind of game changers are for the industry within advanced manufacturing that are finding their home and their roots and their growth right here in New England. So our manufacturing practice refers to something called the new economics of machining. And you take traditional manufacturing, which was really focused on structural cost versus product cost, low cost inputs, cheap labor, figuring out where to source those things from and bring them into the production process to get a total cost of production as low as possible to get a good to market. Moving through the kind of emerging economics, or these new economics of machining, you have three regional capabilities that are here in New England found in spades. And one is leveraging the network of firms that exist here for superior design capabilities. So at this point, technology exists not only to have produced digital design, but also to share that digital design across the globe if necessary, to bring the best minds in engineering and design and best practices to bear on a product before that product even becomes prototyped, before you even encounter a single design flaw that would end up being very costly further down the line. And there is an extensive network here. I would even say that the fact that the facility that we're in today is probably evidence of that, bringing that talent together to leverage the network for superior design in New England. Second is to invest in automation and optimization. And I think, given some of the anecdotal evidence that we've heard from manufacturers here in the region, we are at a point of maturity within a lot of the firms here where they're able to make investments in automation to the extent that they have lights out capabilities. We were touring a firm up in New Hampshire earlier in the summer as we were going around and giving these presentations, and they were showing us the shop floor and how basically they showed us what would be produced later that day after we left and overnight. So if we were to come back the next day, we were able to see everything that would have been produced, not by a human, but by a robot, while we were all gone from the firm, and the folks that were calibrating those machines and making sure that everything was produced to spec. Investing in distinctive skills. So nowhere else, I guess at this point, we've kind of made the case that for advanced manufacturing, the talent base is the critical input. And without it, it's very difficult to leverage any of the regional capabilities. Here in New England, you have not only access to brilliant minds coming out of the universities and the school system here, but you've also got a larger base of skilled workers at that middle skill level that is so critical at the moment in terms of a skills gap. Those middle skill folks that have industry certifications, high school education, in some cases they have technical schooling or some college, but they're really able to help fill in some of the gaps that exist in terms of the workforce for advanced manufacturing. And lastly, on top of those regional capabilities, there's these emerging technologies or game changers, and I'm sure that there were some of them that have even been discussed on the agenda of this event. But things like additive manufacturing, innovative materials and design, as well as kind of starting to adopt that Industry 4.0, bringing together the realm of the physical with the digital and closing the loop. Those are kind of the areas where New England has really latched on, and perhaps that's just the benefit of having so much infrastructure here to think about these kinds of problems. But these are areas where the businesses that are starting to lead, a lot of them are located here. They're located near each other, they're sharing these ideas, they're bringing them to the marketplace and helping commercialize that technology, which spills over to smaller firms within the supply chain and really starts to up the game of the region as a whole. So at first we had this premise about the new economics of machining and how it was going to advantage New England. But we didn't just want to put that premise out there and let it hang. So we actually went and got some data to try to show how these emerging economics actually close the gap between New England, a high-cost geography, and lower-cost geographies, such as those located in the South and Southeast. So we took a low-cost county in the South and we benchmarked it against cities from each of the 6 New England states where there's advanced manufacturing activity. And we noticed that on average, there was approximately a 10% cost gap. It was 10% more expensive to do business here in New England than it was to do it in our low-cost county in the South. 10% is substantive, but actually anything less than 10% we found, speaking to manufacturers, that's not enough to tip the scale in terms of a business attraction or relocation decision, but it may over time actually promote them to try to go and expand their business elsewhere when they're looking to do new projects or to take new operations and expand them. So we broke out that cost disadvantage, that 10%, and we found that it was made approximately of 6.5% labor, 2% real estate, 1% energy costs, and 0.5% for taxation policy. And that represented that 10% delta between our low-cost county and what we saw here in New England. Now, adding back into that, the cost advantages of having superior design capabilities, technology, and talent here in the region available to help support product design, commercialization, and marketing. Increased automation capabilities to actually aid the production process, and access to skills, both high skills as well as middle skilled labor. There was actually a cost advantage to doing business in New England. We discounted these numbers a little bit to account for competitive response from the marketplace, which could take a variety of forms, but overall, New England actually had a 6% cost advantage overall compared to other parts of the United States that compete against it. And for economic developers, that's huge, to be able to articulate that story and explain why, while on the surface, New England is a costly place to do business, and this is kind of accepted as a given, there's actually an intrinsic advantage here within the industry that makes companies want to stay here. And we didn't just take that for granted. We actually spoke to folks and vetted this data with them in our interviews, and they said, even if they're approached on a weekly basis by states outside the region who are offering them tax incentives, land, training programs, to help skill their workers up, et cetera. And they said, you know what, I can't afford to move out of this region. It would hurt me to not have access to New England, to my network of other suppliers in New England, to the type of talent that I can get a hold of in New England. It's just not worth it. So it played out when we had those conversations with actual industry folks who had skin in the game. So industry clusters for which New England is particularly competitive. We did some analysis, and for folks who aren't familiar with location quotient analysis, this takes the representative employment in a given area and compares it to a larger geography. So in this case, it was taking New England and comparing it to the rest of the United States. And if you get a location quotient of 1, that means you're average, you're equal to the overall representative sample of the US. And if you get something above 1, that means there's really something going on there. There's some kind of competitive advantage which is causing firms and employment to concentrate in a given area. And if you see something that's actually up in the 2 or higher range, you're getting to be globally differentiated. This is actually creating an industry cluster of global significance. And so as you can see, there's some pretty significant numbers here for New England. Signal processing, navigation, optics, and measurement was one cluster that we looked at. That's a 1.7. Here in Massachusetts in particular, it's a 1.75. So that's nationally differentiated. Again, to get something close to 2 or higher would be even to be globally differentiated. Aerospace and defense, of course, across this region at a 1.62. Medical devices and biotechnology. Semiconductors and complex electronics, that's a 1.9. Just across the border here in New Hampshire, I want to say it was upwards of 6. There's an extreme concentration of that activity in this greater Boston area. And here in Massachusetts, that semiconductor was 2.20. And for medical devices and biotech, it was 1.37. So you can see there's some actual deep pockets. Part of that is the clustering of firms, the clustering of employment, but also the network that's available to them to grow their business or to take new products to market or commercialize new technology or invest in emerging small businesses and innovations. You'll notice that we have precision machining on the list here and that it's at 1.01. And you're saying, okay, well, what's so significant about that? She just said that 1 means average. Why are they including this here on the screen? We wanted to really highlight precision machining and kind of note the fact that it is a linchpin industry cluster, not just within the New England region, but within the advanced manufacturing industry as a whole. So the ability to develop precision parts, to troubleshoot, to craft instruments or to craft machine parts and tools that are needed in order to identify or remedy a particular production challenge. New England has historically been a stronghold for this particular type of skill set, and part of it comes from watchmaking, rifle making. I mean, it has its roots in actual craftsmanship. But in recent years, we've noticed that the industry has declined as a result of companies either relocating to lower cost areas, closing down shop as the workforce retires, because in some cases these were small shops, with folks who reached retirement age and left the business without anyone, a successor to pass their business to, and an overall decreasing regional talent pipeline. So precision machining is tough. The analysis that we did here is an actual manual calculation going through all of the industry guides and business listings of all of the precision machine shops and CNC machine shops that we could find in the New England region. And you'll see Massachusetts has 951, which is an amazing story for Massachusetts. That means that folks have to come to Massachusetts and Connecticut, essentially, when they have a design problem or a machining problem. They need someone to help them troubleshoot it and figure out how to fix it. The problem there is the average age of workers in this industry is in the mid-50s, and so they're approaching retirement, and the knowledge that they have, that they've built up over an entire career of doing this type of work, is not that easily imparted to a student, even an eager student who would come in and try to learn this information. It's something that you could start to learn by taking technical school courses or getting kind of your basic levels of certification at a community college. But essentially, apprenticeship is key to learning precision machining. You really have to learn kind of at the elbow of someone who's seen a lot of different applications, who's worked with a lot of different materials, and who really understands the context of problem solving in this field. So we want to highlight that precision machining is critically important to all of these other industry clusters and to making them successful. So having identified those 5 competitively advantaged industry clusters, we also took a look at, what are things that make them more successful here than elsewhere? And we identified 3 capability clusters and a set of 3 game changers that really differentiate New England and make it even more competitive. And so software and artificial intelligence, sensors and automation, and advanced materials were 3 capability clusters that we felt each took signal processing, aerospace and defense, medical devices, complex electronics and semiconductors to the next level. And within the report, if you get a chance to read it, there are some incredible case studies. We've highlighted some of the companies here that contributed to the report, contributed case studies of just next level applications of advanced manufacturing technology that highlight those capability clusters specifically for this region and for the states here. And then lastly, we took a look at game changers. So digital design and manufacturing, additive manufacturing, and the elusive Internet of Things. And we did case studies on those as well. And those game-changing technologies, I can give a couple of examples here, but things like OPM, which is actually a biomedical device company down in Connecticut that uses digital design and 3D printing to take an MRI scan. I think since we were talking about health in the previous section, I'll just continue the health examples. They take an MRI scan of someone who's had a traumatic head injury or brain injury, and that MRI becomes the digital blueprint for a bioadaptive advanced material to actually create the lattice work for a cranial implant, which the surgeon it's customized to the person who's getting surgery. The surgeon just has to implant it, and then over time, the cellular framework fills in with the patient's own biological material, and it becomes part of their skeleton. But the idea that you could take technology, MRIs that already existed, and then they become the blueprint that feeds through the production process to create such a customized product is one example of game-changing technology that is rooted here in New England that is now being brought to life and being commercialized here. So now for the call to action. We've described all the great parts about New England and advanced manufacturing here and why this is a great place to do business if you're an advanced manufacturer. But it's an advantaged area, but continued prosperity shouldn't be taken for granted. And so in this section, we really want to talk about this widening talent gap that Mark mentioned and potential challenges that New England will face. I think some of them may resonate with the folks who are here visiting from Canada. Want to hear maybe about some of your experiences and any islands of excellence that you might have identified that we should try to emulate here in the States. And emphasize again how a coordinated effort, not only across states and within the region, but across the different ecosystem players here is important in order to turn the tide and really start to put forth the workforce development investments that will be necessary to support advanced manufacturing at the level that it needs to be supported. So conceptually, in a virtuous growth cycle of advanced manufacturing, you've got a great labor shed full of talented and skilled workers. There's enough plentiful talent to go around, and employers can then hire them, they can train and apprentice them, they can make the kinds of investments that they need to make in order to explore new product lines and continue a virtuous cycle of growth. But when you have some dampening factors that get into this model, things like particularly the skills gap, or having unfilled jobs, you start to get into a dampening cycle of growth. And these are not necessarily New England's challenges, they're actually America's challenges. They may in fact be global challenges. But once they get into the cycle, they really start to stagnate the growth that is otherwise happening in the advanced manufacturing industry. And so the challenges, when we spoke to these 125 stakeholders in the course of our interviews, really coalesced, and in some cases they used the exact same words to describe them, around 5 challenges. And the number 1 challenge was education and the skills gap. It was said by 100% of the folks that we talked to, and 99.9% listed it as not only their first, but their second and third challenge. It was such a large challenge that it overshadowed the other challenges on the list. And so they said, put this one at the top of the list, this is the most important one. Small and medium-sized enterprises followed closely behind. So the unique challenges that a small or a medium-sized manufacturer has to adopting new technology, to scaling up their enterprises, to accessing and unlocking markets where they can provide and be a supplier to another company. Those SME challenges to scale, sourcing their own talent even, were second on the list and also very acute. Alignment of policy to industry. So at this point, we've got multiple stakeholders in different levels of government. They're all trying to be very responsive to the needs of industry, but in their attempts to create policy, they're not always doing it hand in hand with industry. And as a result, they're getting remedies, initiatives, et cetera, but they're not necessarily what industry needs or what industry wants. And so there was an outcry for aligning policy to industry and allowing industry to have a seat at the table and a strong voice informing the development of policy to help address their challenges. Complex regulatory environment, so in some cases, we spoke to especially small and medium-sized manufacturers who said, I'm not even necessarily sure of all of the regulations that I'm subject to, and I have to hire outside help, not only to help me realize what I need to be responsive to, but how often I need to report, how to stay compliant with those regulations. It's a dampener on my business. And then lastly, the high cost of doing business in terms of energy, in terms of taxation, in terms of kind of those structural costs that are endemic to the Northeast region of the United States. Not for nothing, each state is doing many things to try to address these 5 challenges. And of note here in Massachusetts is MACWIC, a workforce development and training program that combines flexible career pathways, which are important here for the US, so that folks don't have to choose between higher education and technical education. They can actually figure out a way to have both while they're getting skills, avoiding taking on massive amounts of student debt, and also getting skilled work opportunities and apprenticeships here, as well as stackable credentials. So allowing folks to go from a technical school environment to a traditional 4-year university or college environment, and to do so seamlessly, to recognize the quality of a technical education, and to add that on so that folks who are able and motivated can continue to move on and get an engineering degree or even higher and move up through the organization and improve their own investments in education. Each state has an example of something like this. And we call them islands of excellence because each program individually is doing an amazing job. But the scale of the issues that exist for the state and for the region as a whole are so large that one nonprofit or one group, one statewide consortium, working as hard as they can, they're usually maxed out in terms of capacity, all their seats are filled, and industry could probably take another 100 if they were able to scale up. So our guidance here and what we heard coming from the folks that we spoke to was, let's take these islands of excellence, let's figure out, are there ones that Massachusetts, for example, can export to other states and create a regional model? Or are there best practices happening in other states that we ourselves should learn from? And I think when we talk to the panel, it would be great to hear, given that the education system and given that policy works a little bit differently in Canada, if there are some lessons that we can glean from that model, islands of excellence that you've been able to implement, I think that would be something really illuminating for this discussion. And overall, our recommendation here is kind of a systemic approach to change. So you'll see that there are 6 key recommendations. The top 3 all revolve around hitting that #1 challenge and pain point of the skills gap. So creating comprehensive educational pathways, not just technical schooling, but comprehensive educational pathways that take you all the way through the K through 12 system and up through higher education with multiple on-ramps and off-ramps for folks to have options in their education throughout their lifelong learning. Creating industry partnerships and apprenticeships, apprenticeship models being one of the key ways to pick up these skills and to actually join the advanced manufacturing workforce and to create that skilled workforce that they need. And rebranding the industry. So we've got a brand issue and a brand problem. Anyone who describes the industry as dark, dirty, dangerous, or declining and has said that around their children or has said that around their neighbor has, in some ways is the target that we would want to reach to help rebrand this industry. We found that by focusing on the maker movement and starting to talk to students as young as middle school and elementary school about how what they're doing with their own digital design software, how they're developing things and selling them on Etsy, that is manufacturing. And it's the seeds of advanced manufacturing and starting to pull them into educational opportunities that will allow them to exercise their talents in those skill sets and at the same time start to really think about making things as less of manufacturing, but more like making things. And across the bottom of the graph, you'll see 3 other recommendations: aligning policy with industry, support to scale for those small and medium-sized manufacturers, and lastly, and this is something that's unique to the US, but securing an NNMI institute. That's National Network for Manufacturing Innovation. The US government publishes several opportunities per year to house a center of excellence and make investments specifically in one type of advanced manufacturing innovation. And I think the announcements, if this is March, we should be hearing what the new announcements are within the next couple of months for the US. And at that point, it's our hope, working with the New England Council and working with the stakeholders to this report, that we'll be able to make a decision about what, if anything, the New England region would like to pursue in terms of such a center of excellence. So each state should take these 6 key recommendations and try to implement them, but at the same time, we advocate for regional coordination across the 6 states. And just to give you an example, last September, at the end of the month, 5 of the 6 New England states received American apprenticeship grants. So designations that range between $3 and $5 million. I think Massachusetts as a state received 3 different ones, so almost $10 million worth of money to create advanced manufacturing apprenticeship programs. If there were a way to take this example of regional coordination, if there were a way to have the state representatives come together and figure out how to maximize and optimize the footprint of those advanced manufacturing academies across the region of New England, so that they weren't all necessarily producing the same type of worker. You may be able to have some regional specialization to reflect local needs. I think you could have an overall much stronger lattice of American apprenticeship programs working across the New England region, and that would enhance economic and workforce development on a much greater level than each program trying to work its own individual grant. So there's a seat for everyone at this particular table: educators, policymakers, advanced manufacturing folks, and industry. And I know they've already given a lot, but they've got quite a big incentive to do so, and I guess we would lean on them and impress upon them even more to share their pain points, articulate their needs to educators and policymakers, help steer the agenda. I think otherwise, we're getting to a situation where the pain is being felt now and we're understanding industry's struggle, but policymaker and educators are not manufacturers. They don't necessarily know how to create that curriculum for the workforce of tomorrow, or how to craft policy that's going to make it easier to incubate technology while protecting intellectual property. They really need that input from industry to have some guidance about what to do. And then lastly, you'll see these state PMOs. We really advocate for creating a program management framework within each state and across the region that's going to bring the stakeholders from industry, from workforce and economic development, from all of the programs, from education, all of the programs that exist in parallel to each other, bring them all to the table so that the agenda can be set collectively as opposed to in silos. So the report is 125 pages long. If you didn't have time to read it, that was your executive summary, but it is located on the New England Council website. And we also, if you want to reach myself, my email is there, Chris Averill from the New England Council. Again, regrets that you couldn't be here today, but we are very excited to talk about the report, and we are happy to answer questions or share additional information about it. If anyone's interested, I'll hang around a little bit after this presentation and happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.